All right, everybody, as we begin tonight, we're going to first some housekeeping things. Just want to let you always know who we are as Justice and Beyond. Justice and Beyond has been doing this work of organizing and bringing groups together in a coalition collective form in order that we might bring issues to light that need our attention so that we can hear from organizations that are on the ground doing the work and we can get engaged and get involved and organize together to make change, whether that's policy change, whether that's showing up for events, whatever that is, whether it's voting, making sure that we show up to make a difference. We are organized by our pillars. Pillars are organization and people that have signed up and committed themselves to making sure that they manage justice and beyond, if you will, showing up for a regular meeting during the week at 4:30 on Tuesdays now to be able to plan for our upcoming forums, as well as being able to handle any business of justice and beyond. I'm grateful for all of those pillars that do that. We're always open to more pillars. So tonight, as we gather together, just want to make note of one thing. If we are, in fact, Zoom bombed at any time, because we know that's a thing that we have to deal with. If there is a Zoom bombing, then we will shut down immediately. And we simply ask that you would just get back on, sign back on just very quickly, and to recognize that we have solved the problem by eliminating who else says eliminating whoever the Zoom bomber was from being able to get back on. Also, too, if you are not getting our normal newsletter, please send your information to Brooke Randolph, who we can find in the participants list, and give your email so that we can make sure that you're getting update information about what our next forums are, or whatever information that you will need. And so, with that said, I'm going to ask that our guests would introduce themselves that are here and giving up their time to be here on tonight. We're so very grateful. And so I'm going to ask first, Andronika, if you would give us a 2-minute introduction, 1.5, 2, whatever, introduction of yourself. Welcome, Andronika.
Thank you so much, Reverend Manning. I will be brief. While I know that there are always new people participating, we know that our relationship with Justice and Beyond goes really deep, so I don't need to spend a lot of time introducing myself to these folks. We participate with y'all, and we are so pleased and honored that Justice and Beyond has taken up the cause of housing justice in the way that you have. I'm Andronika Morris. I'm the Executive Director of Housing NOLA, an initiative designed to end the housing crisis in New Orleans as well as across the rest of the country. We've done so by working on a radical plan that dares to believe we can create a new system where housing is a guarantee for all. And so we've been working on that for quite some time, and we're going to continue to work on it because it is possible and achievable. So thank you. I'm going to hand it back over to you, Reverend Manning.
All right, Andronika, always good to see you. And thank you. You are a good friend of Justice and Beyond, always showing up when we ask you to, and appreciate that. All right. Is Damon here? All right, Damon.
I don't see him.
All right.
I
Damon,
don't see him.
Sylvia, Damon is not here yet. Joe,
No, sir.
Joe, good evening to you.
Good evening, Pastor Manning. Thank you for inviting me here today.
Absolutely. Welcome.
I'm the Director of Community Engagement for Unity of Greater New Orleans. Unity is a collaborative of over 50 organizations who provide housing and supportive services to people who experience homelessness in Orleans and Jefferson Parish. And I have been with Unity for 13 years, working in a variety of capacities. But we are deeply committed to the work of housing justice, to seeing people who are the most affected by the housing crisis safely and successfully housed.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Always good to see you. So glad to have you tonight. Y'all, since Damon is not here, we have some pre-written questions, but I want to start off this way. Let's define crisis. Where are we in the city of New Orleans in terms of what this crisis looks like? Real numbers, what we're dealing with as far as houselessness is concerned. What really gives us an accurate picture of that very serious terminology of crisis? Andronika?
Sorry, I didn't think you were going. I didn't think you were going to be on that one. I'm sorry, even though I'm listed. So the crisis. When we talk about the housing crisis, we're talking about the fact that most of the people who call New Orleans home cannot afford to live here. That means that they are housing insecure. They cannot. They can't cover their monthly costs. They're at risk of becoming either being evicted or foreclosed upon. And those numbers are inching up. And so it's part of the reason why the number of homelessness is increased. I'm going to let Joe talk more about that, those numbers, about what that looks like, what's happening for folks who still have housing or some semblance of housing is dire. Almost 2/3 of renters are struggling to make ends meet every month. And about almost 40% of homeowners are also struggling. We expect both of those numbers to go up by the end of this year, because regardless of whether or not there is another storm that hits Louisiana, and we know that one will be hitting, the estimate is insurance rates are going to increase 23%, even if there was not going to be another storm. So that's the baseline, a 23% increase across the board for the entire state. So that means that since we do have an event imminent, we are going to see that increase plus as we move forward. So people who are struggling to pay right now are going to be paying more. Unfortunately, our legislature voted to allow for our insurance companies to increase. Most people know that you can typically, you only get an insurance increase annually at your renewal. Now the insurance companies are allowed to do multiple renewals throughout the year, even without advance approval from the insurance commissioner. So we will see. That's how we know that we were going to see that 23% increase, and that's how we know that that increase is going to be even worse given what's brewing in the Gulf right now. So that means that homeowners and renters, this is something that people miss out on sometimes, that renters also and have been bearing the brunt of the insurance crisis for longer than homeowners. They just haven't been seeing the bills. Their landlords have been getting the increases, and they've been passing it on to their tenants. Over the last few years, we've seen triple-digit increases in monthly rent, so over $100 per month increases in monthly rent over the last couple of years. That is connected to the insurance crisis, which hit landlords and their renters first. Now it is hitting homeowners, and hitting homeowners in a really, really impactful way, and so they're feeling it as well. So this is a crisis, and to make sure people are clear about this is the insurance crisis is worse than it was after Katrina. So that means that we are at real risk here. We're seeing a massive population loss. We're the only southern state that's not seeing a population increase after COVID. Louisiana is depopulating. New Orleans is depopulating slightly less than our surrounding parishes in Jefferson and other parts of southeast Louisiana and even North Louisiana. But we're actually we're losing population as well, but at a slower rate, because we have so many things that were built post Katrina. But those investments are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and people are they're not going to be able to hang on for much longer.
All right, thank you. Yes, so you've defined crisis in a very appropriate way. Thank you for that, Andronika. Joe, how does Unity look at this crisis and define it in terms of the population that you all deal with?
Yeah. So we specifically deal with folks who have fallen out of housing for one reason or another. Typically, for every person who has experienced homelessness or become unhoused, they have their own personal stories and experiences. But we know when we look at the aggregate data that there are factors that really are shared factors that really can predict whether any given area has high rates of homelessness or not. And that is, are rents affordable relative to people's incomes? And as Henrika described, rents are not affordable. The fair market rent for the New Orleans metropolitan area is $11.49 for a 1-bedroom. That said, there are many neighborhoods where you cannot find a 1-bedroom apartment for $11.49. And even if you did have $1,149 a month to spend on the rent for a 1-bedroom, that would mean that you were bringing in, on average, for that to be affordable, you have to have an income of $41,000 a year. So for people who are making close to minimum wage, maybe $10 an hour, that would only be a rent of half that would be only what could be potentially affordable to a person. So there is a really, really deep crisis of affordability in terms of the cost of housing. There's a real crisis in terms of people's incomes and their ability to pay for housing, and that leads to people becoming homeless every day in our communities. There are new people who experience this homelessness every day. They may stay at a shelter, they may stay on the street, in a car, or some other place that's not fit for human habitation. Our member agencies we're designated by HUD as a continuum of care for this metropolitan area. So we have a specific focus on people who are living in shelters or in other places that are not fit for human habitation. Abandoned buildings, cars, outdoors, encampments, all those sorts of things. And we work to get folks identify who's in those situations, to triage people, make sure that those people who are most vulnerable are the ones who are prioritized for services, and then to make sure that people have the services that are going to keep them housed and keep them from becoming homeless again. We have seen less significant increases in homelessness than has the nation as a whole. So where homelessness increased 12% across the United States from 2023 to 2024, based on a point in time count. So that's an undercount of everybody who's homeless in the course of a year, but that is the sort of the standard baseline way of measuring homelessness in communities. We saw only a 5% increase. However, that's a 20% increase over 2 years. But one of the reasons that so that increase is good, that we have only seen a smaller increase, but it portends potentially greater increases later on if resources are not brought to bear to house the people who are already unhoused, and to make sure that for future renters in particular, that there are resources available to keep them in housing and to make housing more affordable, so that things like a health crisis or a loss of job don't become a situation where people are living without housing, period.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, Joe. Let's talk a little bit about vouchers. We know that many people who have become unhoused and who are low income depend upon vouchers that are given out by given up by not HUD, but help me now,
Housing authorities.
Authority, and we know that those are given out in a certain amount. So let's talk a little bit about how do we know the numbers in terms of how many vouchers are given out and how many vouchers are actually needed for people, and if there needs to be changes in the system that will enable people to be able to get those vouchers who are not getting them now. Andronika, you want to address that?
Sure. So one of the things I'll talk about is this is one of the areas where we need serious federal reform because the way the program is designed, this is one of the few federal programs that is ridiculously underfunded. We know exactly how many people need, from an income perspective, a voucher assistance in order to rent in the private market. Given the fact that the United States government is no longer in the business of building new public housing, we know that the only other way that people can achieve housing security is a number of people whose income is too low to afford housing and need that subsidy is with a Section 8 voucher. That program is funded to the tune of only 25% of the need that we have. So we only have enough vouchers in the country for every 1 in 4 persons, 1 or 4 households that qualifies for it. So it is dramatically and ridiculously underfunded. There is nothing we underfund to this area, to this degree. Only making enough available for a quarter of the people we know qualify. So it is designed. That's why you hear about the ridiculous wait lists. That's why, and this has been built in for quite some time. So that's why you hear the wait list remains closed, because the Housing Authority knows once they get a substantial list, like right now, they have a list of, they started about 2 years ago with a list of about 12,000 people. They know it's going to take them years to move through that list. Even with the amount of vouchers that are allocated here in the city of New Orleans, we have about 18,000. But the way it becomes available is if someone passes on or if someone is removed from the program. Now, we have some other vouchers that Jill is probably going to talk about that come with the kind of wraparound supportive services. I'll stay focused on the traditional tenant-based vouchers. One of the other big problems that we had is because of some of this program misalignment, there are also other challenges, namely how the program works with landlords. So while you do have a lot of bad landlords who seek to take advantage, there are also challenges with how the program is administered. And so, and unfortunately, given the way biases work around housing and security, this all gets blamed on the tenants. And so everybody's probably heard that Section 8 tenants don't care about properties, they tear up your properties. There is absolutely no evidence, and this has been studied ad nauseum, there is no evidence that poor people, and certainly not poor people who have been able to have traversed the challenges to get a voucher, are more destructive as renters than anybody else. It's just not true. And yeah, renters can be a problem sometimes. Renters can cause confusion. So can students inside of schools. So can customers inside of restaurants. If you have a service-focused business, sometimes your customers can be jackasses. Sorry. That is not exclusive to people who are consuming housing, or the thing that they are purchasing is housing. It's just a thing about people. And so as a business person, you need to be prepared to deal with that. But because of the voucher program and some of the challenges that the housing authorities and the program administrators bring to it, they're sometimes slow to respond. The inspection process can be quite fraught. There's some bureaucracy inside of it. And because it's kind of set up to fail, there's also this cynicism about whether or not it actually can work. All of that gets focused on the people, and the people struggle. So they struggle to find landlords, and they struggle to find people who will take a chance on them, even though they are coming to the door with the ability to pay, and they get taken advantage of. So it's been a problem here in New Orleans for quite some time. It's a problem in Jefferson Parish as well, and there's been some progress. At one point, we had 1,000 vouchers going unused on a daily basis. That went on for a couple of years. We've seen some progress, mainly because insurance rates have gone up so much, the costs have gone up so much. Landlords are now looking for tenants who they can guarantee payment, and that is what the voucher represents. So, but it's still, we still have quite a bit of ways to go before the stigma is addressed and we get landlords ready to treat Section 8 renters the way they would treat any other renter. And we've got to change some of that. And part of the changing of that is the program administrators have to be doing a better job, not simply holding the tenants accountable, holding themselves accountable so that they're building good relationships with landlords, and building good relationships with good landlords.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the fact that this is not being talked about on the federal level enough, that there are not enough vouchers out there is a little disturbing to me, because I've not heard either of our candidates really talking about this in a significant way. Maybe I mean, I listen to the news a lot, and maybe I've missed it. Is it not being put into the conversation enough, Andronika?
Well, Vice President Harris has been talking about building the units so that people could rent, right? That's where she's coming at it from a supply side standpoint. Mr. Trump has not talked about it, despite his real estate background and despite the fact that he spent quite a bit of time dealing with subsidized housing. As a president, though, he did make more funding available for the construction side, not for the tenant-based side. So we do need to be pushing both of them on folks having those choices, and there being more accountability on the government. I think this is one area where there's an opportunity, a very clear opportunity. The candidate who believes government can actually function correctly and whose job it is to actually manage these programs with the appropriate investment. So this would require more money, obviously, so more dollars to invest in our communities. Good news is the money is there already. We've got more than enough money in the housing subsidy. If you look at the totality of what we fund at the federal level for housing subsidies, there's more than enough money in it. It just needs to be spent on the people who need it the most, as opposed to what we're doing. We give more federal subsidy to homeowners who make more than $200,000 a year than we do to Section 8 recipients and public housing recipients combined.
Wow.
That's a misalignment. Right? Yeah. That's a serious misalignment. If you make more than $200,000 a year, why do you need your housing subsidized?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Andronika. Joe, tell me what does Unity, what is Unity's whole relate and that continuum's relation to vouchers?
Yeah. So, so with regard to vouchers, whereas Hano has, for example, 22,000 households, I believe that's more or less correct, receiving vouchers.
22,000, including public housing and vouchers, yes. And, so it's their public housing and their public housing, their market rate units, and their vouchers are about 22,000.
So thank you for clarifying that. So Unity has a variety of different programs. They largely fall into two categories: permanent supportive housing, which, like the Housing Choice Voucher or the Section 8 voucher, is a permanent award to a person, and it comes along with case management services. And unlike the sort of services that a person receiving rental assistance through Hano might receive, whereas there's somebody to check in to make sure that their house passed is an inspection, and they will renew their paperwork on an annual basis. Our case managers meet with people weekly, usually when they first start off, and minimally monthly from there on, to make sure that any concerns that might keep a person from retaining their housing are addressed. And that's done because the people that we're housing, just to qualify for their services, not only do they have to have been literally homeless for PSH, but they have to have a substantial documented disability that is contributing to their homelessness. And that can include a variety of different things, but we have very high numbers of people in New Orleans who are disabled. And so folks with very severe disability will often find themselves on permanent supportive housing vouchers. We also can provide folks with whose disabilities are less severe, whose homelessness has been shorter, but who still have very severe disabilities, or families or individuals who are in need of, because of their vulnerability, are in need of rental assistance and case management services, but whose needs are not projected to be permanent, with what are called rapid rehousing subsidies, which last anywhere from 3 to 12 and can be extended to 24 months, but not beyond that. So on the one hand, you have rapid rehousing. On the other hand, you have permanent supportive housing. And those vouchers pay the fair market rent. We don't have the flexibility that the handout vouchers do of going beyond. We're capped at 100% of FMR. We can't go to 110% in certain neighborhoods. So our folks are really very limited. And sometimes certain landlords who do want to work with the vouchers, I simply won't take a Unity voucher because they won't go up as high as a handout voucher can go. On the other hand, we do try to highlight when we're negotiating with landlords the quality of service and the regularity of payment that they can receive. But with reference to the concerns around discrimination, I really do find that that is an obstacle. Discrimination based on a form of payment is a substantial obstacle. If you take a look at the Fair Housing Action Center's report on the discrimination that people face, it's very problematic, and it's something that that not every state has, because there are states, including New Jersey and some others, who have made form of payment discrimination impossible, or at least more difficult for landlords. So it's form of payment discrimination is often a stand-in. It's used by unscrupulous landlords as a stand-in for racial or class-based discrimination. And it is an obstacle that keeps makes certain areas in particular to be harder to reach for clients or for renters who are paying with a voucher. So the voucher is good, but you have to have private landlords who are willing to take it, and if you don't, it limits its effectiveness.
Wow, it kind of reminds me of people having to check the box whether they are a felon, or or what color they are, or whatever. You check that box that says you got a voucher, and immediately you're behind the 8 ball and discriminated against. And sounds like if the other states have implemented policies to be able to fix this, and we need to be implement those best practices in the city of New Orleans and the state of Louisiana in general.
There are a lot of obstacles to making that happen, but unless it's changed, it's going to continue to pose problems for people.
Okay. Did you have any comment to that, Andronica?
No, Jill hit it.
So let me ask this. We were hoping to have Frank Southall on tonight, talking to talk a little bit about renters' rights. And we know that Jane's Place has done a lot of work on this, and really a lot of work on creating healthy and safe housing, and really moving forward an initiative to have people, landlords especially, register their properties and to have them certified, if you will, as a healthy, safe place to live. Do either of you know how this whole registration process is going, and if people are really held accountable, that is, landlords held accountable for keeping their properties healthy and safe? Andronica, do you know anything about this?
Yeah, we've been monitoring this. We've been working on this as well for a while. somebody might not know, we were not happy with what eventually passed because it misses out on some key pieces, but we have what we have. So the rental registry or the Healthy Homes Ordinance as it is right now, as it stands, is straightforward, just a straight up registry. So we will know where every apartment is in the city of New Orleans once they finish getting everyone registered. They are moving. They just finished another deadline where a different set of landlords, they started with the large, more bigger than 50 units, and then they've moved most recently to fourplexes to get those groups registered and to meet these standards, to meet these new standards. It is a complaint-driven process. That was one of the things that we objected to losing when the council finally passed, that they stripped that piece out. So the tenant has to initiate the issue, initiate the complaint, and then they will come out and inspect. As after everybody's been phased in, basically after you're registered, that's when your tenants will know that they have some protections. Now there's protections right now if you call in and register a complaint. Again, because it's a complaint-driven process, they want to make sure that people are not being retaliated against. The only problem with that is that there are some loopholes. And so if someone, for example, calls and complains about something that is not on the standards, we have very basic minimal standards. You know, there can't be any holes in the roofs or the floor. There needs to be working electricity. There needs to be running water. There needs to be, one of the things that was a big change was, which is great, is that the home needs to not only be heated to a level of survivability, it also needs to be cool to a level of survivability depending on what the weather is like. So when we get our winters, because we get winters now, the home must be heated to, I believe it's the mid-60s. So again, making sure that, you know, you're not going to be turning your home into a little sauna, but that you don't die of exposure. And then the same as we know that people die in heat. And one of the first, communities with the rental registry in the Deep South to get AC put on, because for the longest time that was thought as not necessarily as critical as heating. And so that's really great, a great improvement. So if all of those things if you're complaining about any of those things and your landlord moves to try to evict you, the judge will see that is retaliatory and stop that eviction unless, and there's some loopholes. Some loopholes are if you are on a month-to-month lease and the landlord is just simply moving to end the lease. If you are late on your rent, and so the landlord, so you have to be in good standing to make the complaint and keep the protection against retaliation. So it's slow going in these early days of where they are, but they're getting the registry done. And at a minimum, that's going to be helpful. So we'll know where people are on an event that's coming up. I don't know how many of you know what happened with Hurricane Ida with a lot of the senior properties, because, we were plunged into darkness and without power, and there was a shelter-in-place order. Our city officials, unless the property managers were good, so folks like, the folks at Ashe Cultural Arts Center and Gust Homes and a couple of other places, they actually were on the lookout for their tenants. They had their staff come and stay with them, and they reached out to the city and said, hey, we've got a lot of seniors and vulnerable people here, so we need help. But some of the properties, I'm not going to say who, but some of the bigger senior housing properties did not have that kind of system in place. Because it was shelter in place, their staff left. They left notes for the tenants. And so you had the seniors on their own for days, and the city had no idea who was where and how many units a building had. People reached out to their council members, and the comparison was dramatic. Jefferson Parish had their seniors evacuated by Tuesday after Ida. It took us until Friday. And there was a heartbreaking story of an elderly gentleman he was married. He's married, He had left to go try to get supplies for he and his wife, and he had come back, and they had been rescued by public officials, and had taken his wife. And he came back and did not know where she was. And a reporter found him sleeping under the Destrehan Bridge in his car because he did not know where his wife was, and got him connected so he could be reunited. And that's what happens when you don't know who lives where, right? And so at a minimum, we need this to move forward so we can know where all of our folks are, particularly our vulnerable folks.
Yes. How is it that renters are being informed of their rights? I almost think that when a renter fills out a application for a property, that, just like, I don't know if it still is, but has been a part on applications that talk about lead, that lead has been removed, and sign off on that, or other, signatures that are necessary to say that you've been informed of this information. It seems like to me there should be something that informs the renter. These are your rights. This is your recourse to turn to if something is not right in the property. Has that been required to be provided to renters so that they know their rights?
Only if there's some federal dollars involved do you see that happening. So if there's a voucher at play, the voucher will require that kind of notification. They want to know the age of the property, and the law is pretty straightforward about anything older than the early 70s. There's got to be some information provided about whether or not there's been lead-based paint, and whether or not it's been encapsulated or addressed inside of it. Otherwise, no. And so that is an area where we could be talking about getting engaged. Obviously, that's why y'all wanted to have Frank on. That's one of the things that the Renters' Rights Coalition, as well as a couple of the other groups, Housing NOLA does this as well with our partners, is work to educate folks about knowing their rights. And the folks at the Healthy Homes Ordinance, the Office of Healthy Homes, they are planning on, they've been trying to work very diligently. Their efforts have been focused on the landlords from a registration standpoint, but they do want help, and they do intend to be more aggressive with their outreach and engagement so that renters do know that they're there and what their rights are. But it is slow going right now. And honestly, Reverend Manning, I like the way you were thinking. It could be something that we might want to look at is a piece of legislation, either at the city level or at the state level, certainly, so that landlords, as an addendum to the lease, have a responsibility to talk about what's some basic information that you should be sharing with your customer about the property that they're living in. Not just you getting, their name, rank, serial number, their blood type, their mama's maiden name, so you could sue them if something happens. What's the other side of that?
Yeah, that's a part of transparency and accountability. Absolutely. Joe, you have any comments on healthy, safe homes?
So I will just say that having a healthy and a safe home makes it a lot easier to stay housed. You're much less likely to fall out of housing when you're in a good place than if you're already living in a place that's not good.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe. What's for both of you? What's going on with Hano right now? For those who do not know, what is the state of Hano at this moment? Andronika, you want to comment on that?
No, I don't want to talk about that. No, no. So there's some challenges. The biggest challenge that's happened is a 1-2 punch, or 1-2-3 punch, actually. So the Housing Authority has, after years of not being on the troubled list for HUD, for its management, has now dropped a grade. The way the grades are set up it's based on the quality of the housing stock and the management associated, something that, given the fact that all of the housing has been rebuilt in the last 19 years and it's been built to really great standards, it shouldn't be happening. But it is, because the Housing Authority has had some problems with contractors over the years, with getting them to, particularly on the units that they're managing themselves. They've had problems with those contractors doing a good job. Again, some of that cynicism around bureaucratic impact and achievement is kind of come to play sometimes. And so that's the one. And then the two, that grade coming down is not great. And as a result of that, so you've got some units that are not been really well built, and having issues with them. Then you move into the management side. The Housing Authority has struggled to find property managers to help them, private property managers, to help them manage that inventory. And so they are now looking for another set of private property managers. And the third punch came in the last couple of weeks when the developers at Desire, one of the largest public housing developers and property managers in the country, informed the Housing Authority that they were no longer interested in managing Desire, and handed the whole thing over to them, and they're out. So yeah, this is not great. If part of this issue is also connected to the insurance crisis. You've got the developers who, with a property like Desire, they're seeing increases in their operating costs. They cannot charge more to the tenants, which is great, but their operating costs are higher. So they cut where they can, which would be maintenance. And that leads to the units not being in great shape. That leads to the tenants complaining, the tenants leaving, that drives their revenue down, and on and on and on. And so that is part of the problem. And one of the issues with the Housing Authority is struggling with this right now. We hope, honestly, I was saying someone, we would have liked to have seen Michaels step in. They're one of the largest property managers in the country. Their portfolio has thousands of units across the country in it. And so the fact that they thought our market was too hard to work in is certainly cause for alarm, and wanting to make sure that the Housing Authority, and they have some bad actors. Ladder and Bloom, thankfully, is out of the property management business. They did a terrible job managing large-scale apartment complexes in the private sector, as well as some of the public housing redevelopments. They're no longer doing the work, so there's not a lot of people who do this. And so the Housing Authority is going to have to find or create create some opportunities.
All right. Thank you, Andronika. Joe, does Unity have a lot of interaction with Hano, and has its recent as 1-2 punch, as Andronika described it, have an effect on Unity's work?
I wouldn't be able to speak to that, our relationship with Hano in that way. The folks that we're dealing with are largely people who have not been able to get Hano vouchers or other public housing vouchers in Jefferson Parish communities, which also have vouchers. It's and beyond that, very many of them have serious disability. So I couldn't speak to the Hano's operating challenges in the way that she has spoken so cogently about. But I can say that we have historically a strong relationship of moving folks from our permanent supportive housing program into moving on vouchers with Hano and other public housing authorities, so that people who, despite their disabilities, who have gotten to a point where they can manage their own housing without case management services, can be eligible to get moving on vouchers when new vouchers become available. And that's very helpful in positioning us to be able to house more people who have become homeless and are in need of the greater intensity of services that Unity can offer.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Joe. I'm going to go off script in a question right here because I encountered a problem today that I'm wondering if both of you can speak to. So there is a young family that has been attending worship here that and you can probably guess where that, I'm not going to put the name of the shelter out there, but you can probably guess. It's a daughter, a woman and then her daughter, 1-year-old daughter staying at the shelter. But they also, she has a boyfriend that is the father. But the problem came when I was informed today that they're being put out of the shelter because until Thursday or Friday. And so when they informed me of that and said, Pastor, we're going to need some place to get housing. Can you help us out? Because the message that I got when I was in a conference with the CDC earlier today, the message that I got was for some mysterious reason they're putting us out. So I immediately called the shelter and said, why are you putting your residents, your guests out now? What's going on? And they said, because we don't have a generator. So because we don't have a generator, we've got to put everybody out until Thursday or Friday. And we can't get them housing. We just rely upon see if they can get in a place with their family or get someone else to get them housing, but we can't have them here. This seems to be a huge problem, and that our shelters are actually putting people, I don't know if it's shelters, I won't put S on it, I won't make it plural, but I do know this shelter has had to put people out because they don't have a generator. Number one, what is the solution to that problem, Joe?
Wow, I'm not familiar with that. Unity doesn't have a role in managing shelters. So while we do housing programs and we do work with shelter providers, we don't oversee emergency shelter. We are a housing-oriented organization. But that is obviously deeply concerning because the people in that shelter rely on that for their safety. I would like to know more about what the decision making I wonder what the decision making was that took place that a generator was needed in order to continue to operate. What was that? Why was that made? I believe that historically shelters have operated in the city without backup generators in the past, and so I wonder why that. What change brought that about?
Yeah. It's very interesting to me too. And this shelter is connected to Unity. I mean, Unity sends people to this shelter. So
yeah, we do refer people to shelters. There's no doubt about that. My point is that we don't manage the shelters. We don't fund the shelters for shelter services.
Interesting. Okay. Andronica, you got any comment on that? Maybe it's not a fair question. I don't know. It just really disturbed.
No, I mean, no, and I double muted myself. Joe, I would defer to Joe on talking about that. One of the things that we want to support our Unity with is the work that they have been doing to support the various shelter projects there are out there. There are a lot of different folks who want to be helpful and sometimes fall short. The point would be that there's always somewhere for people to go, and that if this place does not meet their needs, then there's another place. I mean, obviously, we want to, move away from the shelter model completely. We need SROs and, places where people can go and have privacy, because Joe will tell you that it's difficult sometimes to get people into shelters. We had the conversation today about the Housing Trust Fund and heard some very moving testimony about folks who have been housing insecure, and they don't present themselves, even though they are homeless, they don't present themselves to the regular system because they're afraid of being inside that system. And that's not a knock on the men and women who labor to serve these men and women and families, it is a knock on us as a society because we're not giving them the tools that they need to truly help folks.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And as I think about this particular shelter, it just leads me to think too that we just need to get them some generators, yeah, ASAP, so that they don't ever have to do this again. It's not a large shelter, and they don't need to cause people anxiety and stress by telling them they need to find alternate places to reside during a pending hurricane.
Maybe, Pastor Manning, if you'd like to, without getting into names of the shelter, maybe after the call, you and I could talk.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
come to approach about that.
All right, I appreciate that, Joe. My last question before we go to the questions from those in attendance, participants, Joe. There are a lot of people don't understand. I think that there are so many people that are on the street, what in terms of mentally ill people dealing with mental health issues, and various other issues, and for whatever reason or another, they don't want to be housed. Is that truth that we do have a large number of people that prefer just to be unhoused? And if so, how do we deal with those people? And are their numbers taken into account when accounting for how many houseless people are in our city?
So when we do an annual count of people who are homeless in January, most recently, this past January, we counted 1,458 people unhoused on the street on a given night in January. That's anybody that we can encounter that we know to be homeless, whether they want housing or not. I don't know that there's a statistical study of people who want housing or not want housing, but I will tell you, I've been doing this work for 20 years. I've not met anyone who didn't want housing. Not one person who, when offered safe, secure, affordable housing, who wasn't willing to accept it. There are people who, for one reason or another, found it difficult to accept offers of shelter, maybe like because not every shelter is suitable for every person. But shelter isn't the answer to housing. Shelter is an emergency solution for people, and we cannot solve homelessness by expanding shelters. We need to solve and address homelessness by expanding housing. And the city has been successful. Unity's been recently in their encampment housing initiative. Unity has done direct street outreach to housing in the past. So we believe that shelter can be a step along the way to housing and should be, but we can also house people directly out of street homelessness if that's the sort of homelessness that they're experiencing. And in terms of like, do people want housing or not? I've never encountered somebody who didn't want housing, despite any kind of mental illness or addiction they might be dealing with. It is my belief that everyone wants housing. I will allow that there may be a single individual at this point in time who would feel a greater preference for living in an unsheltered situation at a given point in time. But by and large, that is a statistical anomaly that the focus, and when we focus on that, we really do so. It ignores what most people need, which is housing, and it allows those of us who are housed to sort of, in many cases, cleanse our conscience, to say, of the responsibility for providing housing for all. If we suggest that people who are unhoused are doing so because it's a matter of personal choice. I just think that
I appreciate that, Joe, because I remember during the pandemic when I was really doing some serious advocating for those who are houseless. I had a certain city council member tell me a lot of those people are out there because they don't want to be housed. They're still out there in Duncan Plaza because they refuse to be housed. And again, that is a standard line for people who just don't want to give people the help that they need and deserve. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And Mika, you have anything to say to that effect? Andronika?
Oh, I double muted myself. I was just saying keep double muting myself. All I had to say was amen.
Okay.
Yes, amen, 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 amen.
Yeah. And my only question, to Joe, to what you said too, is 1,400 homeless or houseless people. And how Unity defines that is by people who are actually living on the street. And I know that because I've had many people ask me for what they call a homeless letter to state that they are here at 2021 South Dupree, sleeping in front of the church and can be found at this time. What about all the people that are living in abandoned homes in buildings that have been shuttered, but people find a way into them? Is there no way to account for them as well too, and get them housing?
So the 1458 actually represents the number of people who are living. I'm sorry, I said 1458. It's 1454. The number of people who are living homeless, both in the shelters and unsheltered. So on a given night in January, we actually encountered 484 unsheltered individuals, and then the other 970 people were living in shelters. So the variety of the different shelters across the city. Unity used to do a count of abandoned buildings, a very intensive week-long count of people living in abandoned buildings. And when those numbers became substantially smaller, we stopped doing that count. I believe the last year that we did it was in 2018. So we used to include that. However, while we're not doing a specific count in abandoned buildings as we did in the past, we do encounter folks on the night of our point in time count who are unhoused and living in abandoned buildings, and we continue to provide outreach services to them. That the point in time count it's not a comprehensive count of everybody who's homeless. It's but it is simply an estimate of a single night, how many people might be experiencing homelessness. But it's not thought to be a comprehensive number of people who are unhoused in any given year or even month.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah,
Joe.
and let me, if I can say really clear, if I can speak to this really quickly, is that people often, because they see sort of encampments that have a sort of permanence, assume that the people that they see living in encampments or in unsheltered situations, that those folks are constitute a permanent group of people. While it's not inaccurate to recognize a sort of permanence to encampments that have been allowed to persist in certain places for better or worse. The actual composition of those encampments are often very, very fluid, based on our outreach efforts. And the number of people living unsheltered or living in encampments represents a very small number of the total people who are unhoused on any given night. So while people who are unsheltered represent, roughly a quarter of everybody who's homeless on a given night in New Orleans, of the people living in the encampments, the large groups of 10 or more, those folks might represent less than a third of unsheltered people. So it's really, you're talking about a very small fraction of people, and that those numbers change very regularly. And it is true that we really do have to be literally homeless to qualify for services from Unity. So if you're doubled up, or if you're staying with friends or family, or if you're staying in a hotel, that would not meet the threshold of criteria for us to be able to triage someone into homeless services. It is really important, we believe, to prioritize those who are absolutely the most vulnerable for services. It's a housing first approach that has been shown to be effective in New Orleans and nationwide.
If you're staying in a car, does that constitute homeless, houselessness, and being triaged?
Yes, most certainly.
Okay, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much. We're going to turn to some questions from our participants. And Sylvia, if you could filter those questions, that would be great. And if Valerie is there with you, that'd be awesome.
So Valerie and Sylvia are not here.
Okay.
I would be glad to. I have one question myself, which I quickly want to ask, and that is, did we ever get to the question about Medicare and what they did in Florida? That in Florida they had they used Medicare funding in Florida many years ago to assist the unhoused in taking their medications. And are we doing this? And if not, why not?
When it comes to Medicare is one of the primary funders of supportive services in Unity's largest permanent supportive housing program. So the Rebuilding Communities program has 900 participants. It's a partnership with the state, and there are a variety of Medicaid providers who provide the supportive services. It poses certain challenges, and there are lots of other opportunities for managed care organizations through Medicaid to get into the work of providing housing, because housing is it's healthcare for people who need it, for people who don't have it. So we have some good partnerships with some managed care organizations, and but I think we really need. I think there's more opportunities out there for those groups to get into housing.
That's right. So like President Biden earlier this year, they moved forward with a Medicaid waiver that allows us to use Medicaid dollars to pay rent in certain circumstances and situations, particularly for folks who can live independently. That's going to take a lot of work at the state level, given just the state of play at the government at the state level. We are very fortunate to be one of the not like our brothers and sisters in Mississippi, to not be struggling without Medicaid expansion. So that we dodged that bullet, thankfully, because of Governor John Bel Edwards, thankfully. And that, and again, there's a realization that we could not walk that back, because again, our hospitals are some of our biggest employers. And I think that's what did it, especially if you know what's going on in Mississippi. The failure to expand Medicaid has been absolutely tragic in their rural communities. They're shutting down hospitals. Even in their population centers, their hospitals are struggling. It is a mess. And so our hospital systems here are big business players. And so there was a real understanding that could not happen. And so can we take that further under this administration and start looking at these kinds of programs? We're going to try. That is on our priority list for next year. We're going to at least run the traps to see what it would take, because, you've got a lot of folks for whom, especially to have someone stay in their home and not go into assisted care, to not have to go live with family. This could be a good use of those dollars, in addition to the uses that Joe just talked about. So we don't want to. And that's got to be the piece, right? You got to expand the pie. We cannot cannibalize existing programs for other uses of those precious dollars. The point is to grow the pot, not shrink it.
Good. I see Betty has her hand up. I don't think there are any questions really in the chat. There's only, we have an announcement for later, but that's it. So Betty, go ahead.
Oh gosh, I could stay on here for 15 minutes talking about this and asking questions to
I
you
know.
guys. But first thing, Joe, I'm glad I have been able to get in touch with you because Carrollton, Pensiontown area is experiencing a huge population of homeless people. A lot of them are addicted. I have reached out to Odyssey House. I've reached out to Travelers Aid, and they're saying they're not in our district. So would you be willing to have someone from Unity come to the lunch at Okra Abbey one Wednesday, or even meet over there some other time, because they're feeding hungry people. Most of them are homeless. We've got people living in tents. So I'll reach out to you after this is over with to talk to you about what we do, because they are also living in, when Reverend Manning said something about abandoned property, there is an affordable housing developer here in the city by the name of Neil Morris, who obviously is having some real financial issues because he's got 6 pieces of property within a two or three block radius. Some of them have been broken into, and the homeless people are living in those properties. So at least we're housing. We no relation to no relation to underneath. Thank you. But you know, Joe, I would love to have a conversation with you about how we can assist, what the neighborhood can do to assist people. We've got a vacant school building. We've got empty property all over the place. I just can't quite figure out why we can't resolve this. My second thing is to Andronika. Andronika, are we ever going to get the Hanno property developed without insurance rates dropping or money to borrow to build property? Since we're leaving it up, the government's not paying for it. It's leaving it up to the developer to go find the money. Are we ever going to get, it's been 20 years now, almost 18, yep. 16.
19, since Katrina. So, yeah. So a couple parts of that question. So first up, in order to address the insurance crisis, we have to invest in our housing stock. There is no other way. I will be frank about this. The insurance commissioner's plan is insufficient and ill-conceived and ain't gonna work. The plan of magically making this market so attractive, that is the insurance commissioner's plan, making this market so attractive to insurance companies, they will be fighting over themselves to write policies for us, and they will compete against each other and lower prices. It is asinine because it does not, while it leans into the notion of the greedy insurance companies, it ignores reality. It ignores the reality of climate change, and it ignores the reality that after we rebuilt these homes to whatever capacity, whether or not you got a brand new home after Katrina, or if you had volunteers help you, or if you did it a little bit at your time yourself, no matter what's happened, we have been battered the last 19 years with storm after disaster after crisis. And we didn't bring everybody back. So there are less people here, and the risk is greater. The housing stock has been compromised by that 19 years of people. Even if you got a brand new house built to the best standards 19 years ago, because you had the money to do so, it's unlikely you've been able to reinvest in that home at the same level because it's been so difficult and so challenging. And now we actually do have a path forward. We have brand new building codes and standards that if we rebuild and renovate or build new to those standards, those houses will withstand the realities of Louisiana. The building technology has evolved to guarantee that. So now we need one more investment cycle. We need one more round of money. And the money is available in myriad ways and myriad pots. We have to have the will to invest it. That's why we're supporting the Housing Trust Fund, because that's one pot of money. There are billions of dollars at the state left over from the last 19 years of hurricanes, from Katrina, from Rita, Gustav, Isaac, we still haven't properly allocated the money from Ida. And the Inflation Reduction Act is put even more money available. Solar for Y'all funding is going to be coming through the state, should be coming to New Orleans. The city got some Solar for All money where most of it's focused on bikes, but some of it is focused on doing rooftop solars. We've got community solar rules. We've got weatherization money that's at the state, that's coming from the federal government. We have all of these pots of money. And not only can we assemble the financing to rebuild the public housing that's vacant, we can also make those investments in existing homes to drive down rents, because as I said earlier, rents are rising because of insurance rates. The easiest way to do that is to make that home safe and say to the landlord, hey, we just cut your insurance in half. You're going to pass it on to your tenant because we helped you retain your investment. We helped you protect your investment. And you're gonna pay us back by renting that property at a rate that's affordable. That's the kind of investment we want to see with the trust fund dollars, first and foremost, with renters and homeowners, and particularly homeowners, because we can see that really done really easily and very quickly. It takes a couple of weeks to put on a new fortified roof. And in order to put on a fortified roof, you also are going to have a home that's in some decent shape. So you also want to make sure we have resources to put in new windows, to address any foundation issues. We have to make sure that we're helping folks do this. So we can. All is not lost. It is a big ticket item to build the new housing that we need and to renovate our existing housing stock. It's about $34 billion at our last estimate. We're redoing those numbers. We're running these numbers for the last couple of years, and to provide the kind of wraparound supportive services that Joe talked about to go along with it, because folks need that, right? Anybody who's here post-Katrina remembers what it was like to navigate these programs by yourself, and a lot of people benefited from some really great volunteers and nonprofits who came in to help, but most people were going at it on their own, working and navigating the Road Home program, the Small Rental Property program, the Housing Authority, FEMA, SBA, whoever you were working with, you were doing it largely on your own. Folks need wraparound supportive services to make sure that they're okay. And even if all they're getting is, hey, here's a brand new home for you to live in, and your rent is going to be covered, and you only have to pay this. They also, as Joe talked about, they also need wraparound supportive services, because most of us are traumatized by what's happening in this city and how nonsensical it is. So the dollars are there, and don't let people tell you no one's going to give us $34 billion. First of all, we're not asking anyone to give it. We're asking it to be invested, and we are absolutely worth that and more, especially when you look at what we're investing to get this city ready for the Super Bowl. I can think of some other things that we need to be spending, and it's money we have. I'm the first one. I'm a Mardi Gras Grinch, and I'm a Saints meh, so I could care less about the NFL or whatever. And so if it was up to me, that money would not be going into any of that stuff. But play on, Playboy. I know that these things aren't that binary. It's not. Yes, we're spending $20 million putting lights on the Crescent City Connection. That's not the money I'm talking about. I'm talking about the money that's sitting in the state's coffers, that they're waiting for someone to say, well, you didn't do all this work after Katrina, Rita, Isaac, Gustav, or whatever hurricane it is. You can go use it for something else. That's what we have to stop. And same thing at the city with their coffers, that there's ARPA dollars and other resources just sitting there that they are waiting to do something else with. And they've got to do what we need, and that is investing in our communities. And once they put the public dollars to work, the private dollars are going to be what closes that gap, because you can then secure a small loan to renovate your home, to put on your own solar panels, and to get battery backups and do things like that if you can afford those things. If we've made it so the folks who can't do have them, because now this is a city worth living in and you can get financing for it.
Absolutely. Well said, Andronika. We must advocate for those dollars that are literally just sitting there without being used. You make such a good point. Any other questions that you see, Brooke? Did I lose Brooke too?
Sorry, I'm sorry, I muted myself. I was going to ask, why hasn't this money been being used? Are we waiting for something to happen to change the outcome? No?
No, the state is waiting for something to happen so somebody doesn't take it from them, and they can do something else with it. That's what they're waiting on.
So
This is going back
what
15
prevents
years.
us from doing it, from just
The
insisting?
state, the people who have to insist are our legislators, and the people who have to insist are state policymakers. Those are the folks who have to insist that these dollars be deployed. And right now, we've got a Republican supermajority and a Republican governor who are loath to invest dollars, not just in New Orleans, they're loath to invest dollars into our communities.
Right.
They spend a lot of time saying how much they don't want to. They're putting a lot of money into New Orleans. It's the things that we don't want, like putting more people in jail and
Or lights on the
$20
bridge.
million lights on the bridge. They're spending a lot of money and time in New Orleans. We need them to spend the resources that they're literally sitting on the things that we care about. And thankfully, that's one of the things that we're looking to see different with this housing trust fund, is that the council and the mayor's office, it has to start here at the local level. We have to lead from the local level so that when they say, well, y'all haven't spent your money or y'all haven't done everything you could have, our local leaders can push back against it and say, yes, we have. We've taken every nickel we had and threw at this problem, and we're managing the problem well, and we're mindful of what the issues are, and it's still not enough. You have resources for us. And you need to be deploying them with them, so that, and that's how they need to see this coming to pass.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh,
And are there people we should be writing to?
yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, we got to leave it there so that we can all make any hurricane plans that we need to make and get ready for whatever will come our way in terms of Francine. But I want to give Andronika and Joe any final words that you would like to leave us with as we close. Andronika?
So just want to thank Justice and Beyond for having us again, helping us with our mission to put housing first in order to put people first. Anytime you all want us to come back, we will be happy to be here. And we just want to do a quick shout out. The council passed today unanimous. The Council Quality of Life Committee agreed to advance to the full council the ordinance that would govern the Housing Trust Fund, that would create a transparent process to make $17 million available, at least about $17 million available annually, through a process that is going to be driven by community, driven by the people, and approved in front of everyone to know what the dollars are going to be invested in and invested on, and explaining what the previous allocation went towards. That then goes to a vote of the people on November 5th. So please consider voting yes for the Housing Trust Fund on November 5th.
All right. And we're probably going to need some more time to educate people on that so that they know exactly what that's all about. So we'll be counting on you, Andronika, for any materials that we can get out, or just coming back again, even if it's at the end of a Justice and Beyond forum, to talk a little bit about that. Joe, any final thoughts?
I echo what Andronika said about the housing trust fund. It might be the most important thing on the ballot come November. It's critical that we invest local money in housing, and that for far too long we have only spent pass-through dollars and no locally generated money. This would, we hope, be a step in the right direction. Furthermore, as Congress begins to set their budgets, the National Alliance to End Homelessness has like a quick and easy action alert on their website, which is endhomelessness.org. So if you're concerned about the lack of spending on housing from a federal level, I'm fairly certain that they have a form letter that you can send to your congressional representatives about just that. The housing expenditures at the federal level are one of the main things that we advocate on, both for homeless services and for the public generally, for housing generally, including like the housing choice vouchers. And yes, like she put in the chat, this is not a new tax on housing. It raises no additional funds at all. It's simply a statement that the people of the city declare that we want to spend 2% minimally, and they can go beyond. The bare minimum that the city has to spend on housing every year is 2% of its budget. So, and without raising any new money, it's just a commitment to spending the money we have in that way.
Yeah, I wish it was put as simple as that on the ballot, because we know sometimes these things get wordy in such a way that it is not understandable by the basics, by your average everyday citizen. So we will continue to promote it in those words and of how you phrased it, Joe. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Everybody, we're going to have to leave it there. Any announcements that anybody has before we go? Any announcements? I know we're few here tonight, but we will broadcast this. If there's no announcements, let's end with a word of prayer. God, we ask that you would protect the Gulf Coast as Francine approaches. Spare us again. And if we do suffer impacts, give us the ability to organize with each other, to meet the needs of our neighbors, to not overlook those who need help, to check on those who may need help before the storm hits, to make sure everybody is all right. God, knit us closer together, give us more compassion and concern. And we thank you for those who are diligently doing the work to create better housing for the people all over the nation, but especially in the state of Louisiana and in New Orleans. Give us the desire to advocate for the same as we listen and learn and grow together. We ask this in the name of Almighty God and in the name of my Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you, everybody. Be safe, be well.